Chapter 7, Student Internships. I've come up against a lot of scary situations during my time of being a hero. I faced a villain who had multiple devastating quirks, a man with arms made out of chainsaws, and a guy who spit toxic waste at a high velocity. Even after all of that, I don't believe any of it was as frightening as this young man's face. These were the thoughts of All Might as he stood in front of a feral-looking Katsuki Bakugo, who had to be chained up and gagged due to his outrage from his opponent letting him win. This sight will haunt his dreams for a while, but now that the sports festival is over, the students can take a well-deserved break. Having a couple days off allowed Izuku to catch up on some sleep and surveillance he'd been missing out on. After sleeping through most of the day and talking with his mother, Izuku was wide awake for another night of tracking down his target. About an hour and a half into his stakeout, he was reading over a textbook when he heard, "Is that book any good?" This made the boy jump up and nearly have a heart attack from being surprised like that. Midoriya rolled away, then stood to his feet to find out who that was, but he saw no one. Looking around the rooftop, he tried listening closely, then he heard breathing, but it was coming from behind him. Instead of turning around, he just spoke. "You're behind me, aren't you?" The voice said. "Yes." The boy slowly turned around to find out it had come from the girl he'd been searching for this whole time. She had on a gray skirt, black stockings with shoes to match, and a large gray pea coat. Her hair was covered up by a dark-colored hat, and she had a small grin on her face. "You're a little jumpy for someone who wants to be a hero, wouldn't you say?" The girl asked as she started circling the boy. He followed her movements with his eyes while holding a calm facial expression. He thought to himself, "I wonder why my danger sense didn't go off? Is it because she isn't trying to hurt me, or does it depend on the situation?" He finally decided to respond. "Hello again, I've actually been looking for you. The first time we met was under some bad circumstances, and I wanted to help so you wouldn't have to hurt people anymore." She looked at him curiously before saying, "So that's what you've been doing up here for the past few weeks?" Izuku gave a shocked look to her before saying, "Yes, how did you know that?" The girl replied with, "I saw you a couple weeks ago before trying to break into that blood bank. I figured you were going to stop me, so I never went in." Izuku's sweat dropped at this new information, thinking to himself that he needs to work on his stealth skills to prevent this from happening in the future. She then asked, "Why do you want to help me? Aren't heroes supposed to put the bad guys in jail?" As she continued moving around the boy like a cat tiptoeing through a house, he kept his eyes on her as he answered, "Are you a bad guy?" She responded by saying, "I've done bad things and my quirk makes me do things in order to survive." Izuku then said, "You mean your quirk requires blood, right?" The girl stopped her movements, then looked at him. Her grin was gone, only to be replaced by an earnest facial expression. "I'll take that as a yes. I don't think your quirk is bad, but if you allow it to make you do bad things, people will think you're a villain or a bad guy." The girl started walking up to him, then stood directly in front of Izuku. The next thing he knew, she threw him to the ground and put her knife to his neck. Although he was worried, he kept a stoic facial expression the entire time. She looked into his eyes to see how he was going to react. Izuku then spoke. "If you wanted to go out on a date, you could have just asked." This made the girl turn her head to the side out of curiosity, and then she smiled. Hoping this was over, he decided to smile as well. The girl then put her knife away and stood up, offering the boy a hand. Once he got back to his feet, she said, "I'm Toga, Himiko Toga." She stuck her hand out to Izuku and he grabbed it before saying, "It's nice to officially meet you, Himiko Toga." Before he could say it, she cut him off and said, "Izuku Midoriya, I saw you placed second in the UA Sports Festival." He almost forgot that the event was televised. This helps when it comes to your public image, but there are also drawbacks to having everyone know who you are. The two then took a seat on the air duct adjacent to where they were standing and started talking. Toga asked, "You're just a first-year student in the hero program. I figure that's why the police aren't looking for me." You didn't want to get in trouble yourself. Are you trying to be some type of vigilante or something? Midoriya shook his head, denying those claims. No, that's not it at all. If I told the police, they would have just locked you up for attacking that guy. I understand that you needed help. That could be considered not normal. I have a friend who has helped people with your type of quirk, and I wanted you to meet them. Toga looked at him, then said, let me guess, they're in a psychiatric facility and they want to give me medication to help me with my problem. Toga got up to walk away before she heard. Actually, she's a retired pro hero and a nurse. She likes hitting me in the head and always has candy for her patients. This made the girl stop and turn to face the boy as she said, that guy wasn't the only one, you know. He probably won't be the last. Midoriya then stood up and crossed his arms before saying, no one's perfect and I don't believe you had any intentions on hurting them, but I do know that your cravings can cause erratic behavior. Look, just take my number. The boy walked over to the blonde girl, handing her a piece of paper with his number on it. Call me anytime. If I don't answer, I'll call you back as soon as possible. Izuku then grabbed his book and his binoculars, then started to leave. Before he made his exit, he said one more thing. I hope we get a chance to talk again. I'd really like to get to know you. Maybe without your knife this time. He waved, then jumped off of the roof, leaving Toga with a smile on her face. She then looked at the piece of paper and thought, when did he have time to write his number down? He must have planned that from the start when he finally ran into me. The girl then thought about seeing if he'll let her drink some more of his blood. She didn't want to cut him like the others because he would die. It was something about the way his blood kept her cravings down longer than anyone else's had. The plasma he held was the richest she ever tasted, and it lasted for almost a month compared to the others she drank in the past. She then took off into the night, still thinking about the green-haired boy. 2 days later, the students of Class 1A sat eagerly by as Mr. Aizawa gave out the results of all the recruitment offers for internships. In first place was Izuku Midoriya, 3,825. Shoto Todoroki, 2,742. Katsuki Bakugo, 1,109. Fumikage Tokoyami, 829. Tenaya Ida, 653. Momo Yayoi Orozu, 489. Ijiro Kirishima, 112. Mina Shido, 56. Achako Urarika, 23. Yugao Ioma, 11. This made the class yell out their opinions of the results all simultaneously, causing Eraserhead to activate his quirk, silencing the teens almost immediately. Now that you've calmed down, just because you didn't receive an offer doesn't mean you aren't going to be participating. Everyone will be assigned to a pro hero for their internships for a week and get some real experience out in the field. The class cheered in excitement until brought up that there will be a new course coming up today. Everyone scratched their head when he used the word hero informatics, which turned out to be a fancy way of saying hero names according to Midnight. She entered the classroom shortly after the discussion began, and soon after the students started choosing their names. Once it came down to the last 3 students, Izuku was up next. He hadn't given it much thought, seeing as though it hadn't really crossed his mind. He sat there thinking to himself what name he was going to choose, and some memories started popping up as he thought more about it. What is your name? I'm Deku. Well, I see you're living up to your dreams, huh, Deku? I see you're still saving people. I'll see you tomorrow, Deku. He then started writing on his board before approaching the podium. When he displayed his name, the class gasped at what they saw. Kirishima then said aloud, Midoriya, are you sure about that? Izuku nodded, then smiled. This name was made to insult me, but it's how I was introduced to someone special in my life. For now, Deku is the name of a hero. Bakugo looked out the corner of his eye as the green-haired boy spoke. Yayoi Orozu couldn't help but hang on to the boy's words, reminding her of how they met and what that name has meant to her. Once Midnight realized that Bakugo was not going to change his mind of having the word murder in his hero name, she moved on to Ida, who just decided to go with his first name. Midoriya tried talking to him, but Ida just gave him a generic response in order to shed worry from his friends' minds. Izuku decided to keep a close eye on his friend because of this. He knows that what happened to his brother is bothering him a lot more than he's showing. He'll have Eureka keep tabs on him as best she could so that he doesn't do anything he'd regret. On his way to meet up with Momo, Izuku saw Todoroki in the hall, and he tapped him on the shoulder before saying, "Hey Todoroki, who are you interning with?" Todoroki responded to the question with his usual demeanor. "I've decided to intern with my father. I didn't want to originally, but as the number 2 hero his experience will benefit me greatly." Izuku nodded then said, "Well, if you need anything I'm just a phone call away. I'm actually more concerned about Ida at this point." Todoroki remembered seeing the news report of what happened to Ingenium while he was in the hospital visiting his mother. He then gave a look of concern before saying, "What do you think he'll do?" Midoriya grabbed his chin then started to ponder. "I'm not sure, but I know he's angry and blinded by rage. He'll need someone to be there and stop him from possibly doing something stupid." Todoroki agreed before saying, "What did you have in mind?" The two then talked about how to help their classmate and came up with a plan to make it happen. Later on, as Momo and Izuku were in the library, the pair were sifting through hero agencies' invites trying to find the best one for the creation user to choose. Yayoi Orozu scratched her head in frustration before she exclaimed, "This is a lot harder than I thought." She then let out a loud sigh before saying, "Who did you choose?" Izuku then sat up to look at his friend before saying, "Gran Torino. He taught here when All Might was a student and suggested he would be a great pro to intern with." "Gran Torino, I haven't heard of him before. He must not have been a popular hero," Yayoi Orozu stated as she tapped her chin in deep thought. Izuku then said, "I've heard of him being mentioned on a few message boards before, and I'm curious to hear about what All Might was like as a student." Momo laughed then said, "Always such a fanboy, especially when it comes to All Might." Midoriya shrugged his shoulders and they both laughed in agreement at the girl's words. The following week, Izuku is standing in his living room with his bags in his hands as his mother says, "Do you have everything?" Izuku replied, "Yes, I packed everything last night and I sent you all of the information of where I'll be interning." Ainko then said, "All right, make me proud, Anne." Before she could say it, her son cut her off and finished her words. "I'll be careful, I promise. Goodbye and I love you, Mom." Her son's words warmed her heart as he exited their apartment heading off to his internship for the next week. She was really gonna have to find a way to thank one day for training her son. Seeing as though they've only talked on the phone, she also wanted to finally meet him in person to thank him properly. After the hour-long train ride to the Yamanashi Prefecture, Izuku found himself in front of an old apartment building that displayed the same address on his invitation. He walked up to the door then knocked on it and it slowly opened from being ajar. He called out before fully entering, "Hello, I'm Izuku Midoriya. I'm looking for Gran Torino." As he entered the room and closed the door, his danger sense went off, causing him to jump out of the way of a high-speeding object. Once he got up, his danger sense went off again and he backflipped out of the way of another attack. This time he was on guard, but because of the poorly lit room he couldn't spot his attacker. The next thing he heard is what sounded like a bullet leaving the chamber, as a flash of yellow started bouncing all over the apartment. Trying his best to keep his eyes on it proved to be difficult, so he activated his quirk then started his pursuit. The two then began clashing in flashes of yellow and green all over the cramped space. When Midoriya thought he found an opening, he went to strike, but Gran Torino changed directions in a split second and avoided the attack. When Izuku had his back turned, the pro hero went to attack from his blind side. Feeling the blow coming, the teen ducked out of the way as the old man went flying by, but then he felt something wrap around his leg. He turned around to see the boy using some type of black rope that came from his hand. Once he saw this, he finally spoke. "So, this is what Toshinori was talking about when he said One for All had multiple quirks." This made Midoriya release Black Whip and he started catching his breath before responding. So, you must be Gran Torino. It's nice to meet you, sir, and sorry about your microwave. As Gran Torino shook the boy's hand, he was puzzled by what he just said until he turned around to see what he meant. His eyes bulged out of his head comically in realization that some of his appliances got damaged during his little test. He shook his head in disappointment before he said, "It's fine, I'll make Toshinori pay for it. He is the #1 hero after all. He can't expect an old pro like me to be responsible for his protege's damages." Once he finished his statement, he turned around and gained a more serious look with a tone to match. "While you're here, I'm gonna get you in shape like I did for your master." He was fortunate enough to possess a body that could handle one for all right off the bat. Excited to be taught by All Might's teacher, Izuku was prepared for anything he was going to throw at him. "Since One for All has evolved, we are going to have to teach you multitasking, so that you'll be able to use your other quirks in a fight." At a hero agency in Yaku City, Momo found herself standing in front of the hero agency of the #9 hero, Yoroi Musha, a pro hero who has been in the top 10 for years, all thanks to Midoriya convincing her to go here instead of choosing to go with Uwabami. As she approached the door, a man dressed in a butler outfit greeted her. "Hello, Miss Yaoi Orozu, Mr. Musha is waiting for you in his study. You can leave your bags here and follow me." Momo did as he instructed and followed the well-dressed man down the hallway. There were works of modern art hanging on every wall and tapestries across from every door. As she entered the pro's study, she saw a tall white-haired older gentleman wearing what looked like a samurai's outfit kneeling in front of a table. When the door closed behind her, she heard him speak. "Come join me, young one." Momo walked over to where he pointed and bowed before she introduced herself. "I'm Momo Yaoi Orozu, and it's an honor to be chosen by such a renowned hero." He nodded before saying, "Thank you. Now do you know why I sent you an offer to intern with me?" Momo shook her head no before replying, "I haven't the foggiest idea, but I assume you saw me in the sports festival." "I didn't do that well, Anne." Before she could say another word, Yoroi thumped his sword into the floor while it was still in its hilt. This brought Momo's attention to the man's eyes. She noticed they were orange with a speck of black. He stood up before saying, "It was the look in your eyes you had before walking out of the ring, the same look you had a second ago when you mentioned how you fared during the festival. I once carried emotions like that when I felt like I wasn't strong enough. The feeling of despair can be detrimental. Let me ask you this: do you agree with everything I've said so far?" Trying not to let the tears fall from her face, Momo looked up to the man before saying, "Yes." He then said, "Now stand." She did as she was told, then watched as he got into a battle stance. She didn't know what to do, so she prepared herself for anything at this point. Yoroi took out his sword, then a white light started to cover his body. In an instant he vanished, then Momo felt the blade placed at her neck. She turned her head to see the pro standing behind her. When she went to turn around, he disappeared again and struck the back of her leg, knocking her to the ground. She reacted this time and created a shield to block his next attack, but he predicted her movements, then kicked it out of her hand. She fell back and his sword came millimeters from the tip of her nose. Not knowing what to do next, she sat there frozen, remembering the feelings she carried after her match against Takoyami. The pro then spoke. "Where is your head right now? Because it's not in this fight. What would have happened if I was your enemy? Do you think they're going to show you any mercy?" He sheathed his sword, then extended his hand to the raven-haired girl. Once she was back on her feet, he said, "The name of my quirk is called Battle. It enhances all of my instincts and strengths for 15 minutes. When I was in my prime, I could use it for hours, but as I got older the time limit shrank. Because of that, I had to increase my speed to handle any situation I find myself in as quickly as possible." Learning about his quirk helped Yaoi Orozu understand that even for a man his age, he could move insanely fast. "While you're with me this week, I'm going to help you overcome those fears and make you an unstoppable force to be reckoned with. Now draw your weapon and prepare yourself for battle." Momo grinned in excitement, then created a sword to match her teacher. A few days later, Izuku is in a warehouse bench pressing a bus with weights on, the pain was agonizing, and Gran Torino was relentless. "Keep it up, kid, you got 100 more of those to go." Izuku, while struggling to keep the bus from crushing him, said to himself. "Now I see where All Might gets it from." Lifting weights like this became routine, but Gran Torino also had him using his other quirks simultaneously while sparring. The fatigue came quicker than expected, but he was only allowed a short break in between sessions. On the third day, something new happened while he was sparring with the old pro. Gran Torino had the green-haired boy on the ropes, constantly moving around and attacking him where his guard was the weakest. Izuku's control of One for All had gone up to 60%, but he still wasn't able to keep up with his teacher's top speed. He was taking hits while trying to defend, growing frustrated more and more. He took another kick to the face, then fell back. Once he saw that a yellow boot was coming for him again, he wished he could vanish to safety. A voice inside of his head then called out to him saying, "Let me show you how to disappear." That's when black smoke came pouring out of his body, shrouding him in darkness. Seeing this, the pro shot up into the air, avoiding the smoke, not knowing what just happened, and said, "I didn't know you carried smoke bombs with you, kid." Black whip came shooting out of the dark cloud right at Gran Torino. He propelled himself backwards only to be met by his student striking him in the back. Detroit Smash. The pro went flying into the other side of the warehouse, but before he hit the wall he recovered, then landed safely thanks to his quirk. The pro then looked over to the green-haired boy who was laid out on the floor trying to catch his breath. Izuku then picked himself up before saying, "I finally got you." He let out a small laugh before passing out. The old pro then thought to himself, "He's getting better and better each day. If he awakens any more quirks, I might be in trouble here." When Izuku fell asleep, he found himself back at the table standing in front of the previous wielders. This time on, a short man with black parted hair who was the 6th user of One for All was doing all the talking. "Hello again, what you just used was my quirk Smokescreen. It allows you to generate clouds of smoke and obscure your enemy's vision." Once he finished speaking, smoke started pouring from On's body and the room got cloudy. Izuku heard his voice say, "You have to apply the right amount of smoke so that you don't blind yourself in the process. This will also help you track your enemy's movements while they're in your smoke." Izuku then said, "How do I activate it?" On replied, "Find that same feeling you had of wanting to disappear. You'll feel it want to come out to aid you in your time of need. Hold on to what I told you and remember." As he was speaking, all of the previous wielders' eyes began glowing and their bodies started fading away before he said, "You're not alone." Once Izuku woke up from his short nap, Gran Torino made him use his new quirk until he was able to control it effortlessly. The next day, when Midoriya headed over to the warehouse for more training, Gran Torino told him that it was time for some field experience. "Get your costume, kid, we're going to Hosu to do our patrol." When the name entered his mind, it reminded him that he needed to check up on Ida, who hadn't replied to his last few texts. Hoping it meant he'd been busy at his internship and nothing else, Izuku knew there would be a good chance of running into him once they were there. On the way to the train station, Izuku texted Todoroki to see if he had heard from Ida himself. Todoroki replied, "No, he hasn't responded to me either." Izuku replied back with, "I'm on my way to Hosu for patrol, so maybe I'll run into him while I'm there." Todoroki then said, "My father and I will be patrolling there as well." I convinced him that Hosu City would be a better place for patrol experience instead of Musudafu. Izuku replied back to that by saying, "Great, we'll have a better chance of running into him if we're both there. I'll contact you when I arrive." Todoroki just sent back, "Okay." 30 minutes into the train ride to Hosu, Izuku still couldn't get Ida to respond to any of his messages. That's when Gran Torino said, "All you kids do these days is stare at your phones. I really wish you would." That's when Izuku's danger sense went off and he felt something big coming in their direction. On instinct, he used Black Whip to grab all of the people on the right side of the train. He pulled them all away just in time for a pro to come crashing through the side of the train, being carried by a tall lanky green creature with his brain exposed. Izuku saw it and yelled out, "Nomu!" Before the boy could move, Gran Torino told him to stay put. The pro then kicked the creature out of the train and forced it to the ground. After making sure that all the civilians were safe, and the pro wasn't too injured, he leapt off the train into the city. He could see from the rooftop he landed on that the city was under attack in multiple areas. Thinking to himself, if those things are anywhere close to how strong the one was at the USJ, then the pros were going to need backup. Without giving it another thought, he ran into the city ready to help and hopefully find his friends before they got hurt. He shot off a text to Todoroki letting him know what was going on. In a random alley not too far away, the hero native finds himself on the ground bleeding from his shoulder. In front of him stands a man dressed in a black t-shirt and black pants. He has on large boots with toe and knee guards. His arms are wrapped with long bandages. There's a red scarf draped around his neck and a white mask over his face. In his hand is a katana. The blade is dripping with his blood and currently pointed at his face. The pro hero then said, "I'm going to stop you, hero killer." Stain just replied, "How could a fake like you ever stop me?" That's when a white boot came flying at Stain's face, but his reflexes were too quick, and he knocked the helmet off of his attacker. Stain looked down to see that it was just a kid wearing what looked like a hero costume that looked awfully familiar. "Hey, are you one of Ingenium's sidekicks or something?" This got Ida mad and made him hop up, saying, "Don't ever say my brother's name again, you villain. I am Ingenium and I will be the one to stop you." Ida then revved up his engine before lunging at Stain, but the man was just too quick and avoided his attack while slicing Ida's arm. Ida fell back in pain before his body locked up, leaving him feeling like he was paralyzed. The boy hit the ground and saw the man licking his sword once covered in his blood. Stain then looked down to him before saying, "You're just another fake like your brother was. I thought all the heroes are supposed to help people in need and put selfish desires aside." Stain then pointed to the bleeding pro hero sitting on the other side of the alley. Ida, still focusing on revenge, responded to that by saying, "Let him go, your fight is with me." Stain shook his head in frustration, then looked back at the boy. "Not even a licensed pro yet and you're already throwing your life away, what a waste." Stain raised his sword to end the boy's life when he sensed something coming. As he looked up, all he saw was something green moving fast in his direction. The next thing he knew, he was struck in the face and sent flying in the opposite direction. Detroit Smash. These words were heard throughout the alley by the pro and Ida as their attacker went flying away from them. Izuku was seen standing there in his hero costume and lightning circulated around his body in rapid movements. Izuku then spoke. "Ida, are you alright?" Ida responded, "What are you doing here, Midoriya?" Izuku then said, "What does it look like?" "I'm here to save you from getting yourself killed, you idiot. You're supposed to be our vice rep, and this is how you act. Once this is done, we're going to have a long discussion." While he was saying this to Ida, Midoriya was sending his location to Todoroki. Once the message went through, Izuku noticed the other person in the alley. He went over to check his condition when his danger sense went off. Dodging out of the way of a knife thrown in his direction, he looked to see Stain charging towards him. Right before his blade came down, smoke filled the alley and Stain's sword struck the ground, missing his intended target. He started waving his sword through the smoke, then was kicked in the back, which knocked him to the ground. He jumped into the air to see the teen in the green costume swinging a punch aimed at his face. He dodged the punch, then kicked the boy to the ground. Izuku defended the kick and landed on his feet. A gust of wind entered the alley, carrying most of the smoke out with it. Stain was then able to see that the smoke was coming out of his opponent. Noticing this, he decided to test the boy's worth by throwing blades at both Native and Ida, who still couldn't move. Izuku then leapt into the air, flipping over the blades and grabbing them with Black Whip. When he started to land, he sensed something coming and bounced off a nearby wall and jumped into the air. When he looked up, he saw Stain coming at him, but also 3 blades flying at him from 3 different directions. He prepared himself to take on some damage when suddenly flames came shooting from the entrance of the alley, almost hitting Stain. This made the hero killer dodge and retreat while Izuku avoided the knives entirely. Shoto came and joined Izuku, who was next to Ida. He then said, "Next time say I'm fighting the hero killer instead of just sending your location." Izuku responded, "I didn't really have the time, as you can see. We need to get that man some help before he bleeds out." Hearing this, Stain then said, "At least one of you shows signs of being a worthy hero. You'll be perfect for the new society I'm going to build." Izuku then said to the knife-wielding man, "I'm pretty sure there's an easier way to show people that pro-heroes should be taking their jobs seriously instead of just killing who you believe isn't worthy." Stain then said, "I don't have time to waste with you brats. There are more heroes that need to be purged, and I still have to kill that other fake with the hands all over his face as well." A thought went off in the back of Midoriya's head as he remembered the attack on the USJ, and there was someone who fitted that description. That's when Stain jumped at Native, intending to end his life, when Izuku used a Delaware smash to knock him back again. Once Stain was down, Izuku said to Shoto, "Todoroki, when I draw him into the other end of the alley, I want you to create a wall of ice between us as tall as you could make it." Shoto looked at him with confusion plastered all over his face and said, "What are you talking about? Let's fight him together." Izuku replied, "Look, he's trying his best to kill Native and Ida. If we don't stop his bleeding, he'll die. Trust me, I got this." With a determined look in his eyes, Izuku stared at Shoto until he gave him an assuring nod. Stain then got back to his feet and saw several trash cans being thrown at him. He dodged some and cut the rest with his sword. That's when a large dumpster came crashing down in front of him, causing the man to jump back towards the other end of the alley. When he was about to make another move, he saw the boy in the green suit standing in front of him in a fighting stance. Stain then said, "It's a shame that you don't understand what I'm trying to do by purging this world of the undeserving." That's when a large wall of ice formed directly behind the hero in training, blocking the entire alley and cutting the two off from everyone else. When Stain saw this, he said, "Looks like I'm going to have to go through you to get to those fakes." Izuku smirked and then said, "There's something I forgot to mention." Green lightning started popping off the boy's clothes and enveloping the alley's walls. Stain raised an eyebrow, not sure of what was happening, and said, "Oh, and what was that?" Izuku then told him, "I was holding back." Using Black Whip to grab onto the walls and propel him behind Stain, Izuku went flying over the hero killer in an instant. Stain drew his sword and tried hitting the boy, but his blade broke as he attacked. Once he saw that his katana had shattered into pieces, he looked up to witness the boy flying at him at even greater speeds than before. Stain couldn't help but see an image of All Might coming at him as Izuku mirrored his teacher's famous attack with great precision. Detroit Smash. With 45% of 1 for all, Izuku punched Stain through the wall of ice, sending him sliding to the entrance of the alley. As Shoto nursed Native's wounds, the pro ended up falling unconscious. He felt wind and small shards of ice come flying out of the alley, followed by Stain's body. The hero killer laid lifeless on the ground, but he was still breathing. As Ida finally stood to his feet, he started walking over to the villain. Overcome with anger, he drew his hand back to strike the unconscious man, but his punch was caught by Izuku. Ida looked up to see his friend staring at him with disappointment in his eyes. The green-haired boy just sighed and said, "So, this is the legacy you're going to leave behind, going to jail for attacking an unarmed man. I thought you wanted to be a hero who sought justice over revenge." Ida dropped his head in shame, realizing what he was about to do. Shoto interrupted the moment by saying, "Hey, we need to contact my father and tell him what happened." Izuku's sweat dropped at that idea before saying, "We're unlicensed, and if we get caught using our quirks without permission, we'll be in trouble. I have a better idea. Todoroki, first you have to melt all the ice in the alley, then I'm going to need your father's number." Taking Native's phone out of his pocket, Izuku used it to text Endeavor this message. "Hero killer is near an alley on 4210 Echo Street. Send help now." Once the message was sent, the three teens waited in the alley, until they saw the pros approaching. When the heroes were in sight, Izuku used Black Whip to grab Shoto and Ida, then leapt to the top of the nearest building. They looked down as Endeavor, Manuel and Gran Torino along with some other heroes found Stain unconscious and tied up next to Native. When they were about to leave, they saw a flying Nomu heading towards them. Izuku used Black Whip to grab the creature out of the air and hold it in place. He punched it using 60% of One for All, knocking it out cold. Once the creature was taken care of, Shoto encased it in ice when they got back to the ground. The teens then split up and met up with their intern hero separately as planned. When they were questioned as to their whereabouts, they each said they were helping escort civilians to safety. Gran Torino didn't believe a word of the teen's story, but he couldn't prove it otherwise at this point. End of chapter 7.